Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our speaker series. We're so happy that you could attend. This evening, we have another NASA engineer, Ricardo Olivares, and launching into micro-G.
Thank you, Rens. Thank you for coming out here. I'm trying to juggle this with hey, Rens? Is this the only way of changing the slides? Well, no, next one's working. Yeah. Okay. It works. Sorry about that. Okay, so as he mentioned, my name is Ricardo Olivares. I work at NASA Ames Research Center, and the title of my talk is Launching into Micro-G. The reason why I titled it that is because currently the work that I do has to do with micro-G, microgravity, and space station that you see on there. So a few facts about the space station. It basically flies up in space, 254 miles up there. It's the size of a football field, roughly. It has 52 computers controlling it, and the computers control aspects of power, water, experiments that we send up into space. And it uses anywhere from 70 to 90 kilowatts of power. And most of or actually all the power is derived from the solar panels that you see on there. Total area of those solar panels is about an acre worth of area. And as far as the living quarters, they're definitely not luxurious. We've got a lot of cables and tubes hanging out. Sometimes I think to myself that it would have been nice to have, more than just engineers design it, right? Because, engineers like to see things, how they work. If something goes wrong, you want to be able to have access right away. And so that's kind of the way it's built. But then again, it is a laboratory that's flying up there. So they do have 13,696 cubic feet of habitable volume up there. So, and the biggest plus is that they get to fly around there. They actually don't have to walk around. So our roadmap for today is I'll talk a little bit about my background, where I come from, where I was born, and kind of my roots. Then we'll jump into my education, what colleges I attended, the kind of work that I did at the colleges. Kenyatta was one of them. So, and then we'll jump into the what I titled NASA Ames Research Center, which is basically just talking a few bullet points on what the center does and what it was like when I first arrived there a couple of years back. From there, we'll jump right into the first group that I worked with, which was the thermal physics group. They handle work from thermal protection and also Mars Aeolian testing. Second group was the facilities group, which is construction and demolition. A lot of people don't realize that at every NASA site we basically have those teams that dedicate themselves to constructing and demolishing facilities. Then we'll fly into the Flight Systems Implementation Group, which is the group that deals with payloads going up to the space station. Talk a little bit about the leadership training that I've had and my current position in the space biology group. And last but not least, the future and, yes? All right. So we'll start out. So I am a Salvadorean American, born in El Salvador, brought out here at the age of about 3 years old. My parents, there's the picture of when I first arrived, but we'll get to that point. I was brought out here basically trying to get away from the civil war that had engulfed El Salvador at that time. For a while, I think my parents decided that they were going to stay, but then when a lot of the families began to get killed and a lot of atrocities going on, then at that point I think they decided that it was best to leave the country and part for the U.S. And so from El Salvador we left posing as tourists. We couldn't leave looking like we were going to leave the country. That was kind of a bad thing, right? So we left as posing as tourists. We left from El Salvador, flew out to Mexico City. When we arrived over there, we arrived at 11 p.m. and this was August 6th, 1980. And so we arrived in Mexico City, 11 p.m. Basically, we didn't know anybody out there. Walk out the doors, and this is not based on what I remember, this is what my parents remember, right? So keep that in mind. And so we arrived there, it's 11 p.m., taxi rolls up, my dad gives them the kind of the name of the hotel that we were supposed to go to. Head over to the hotel, turns out the hotel is booked. The taxi decides that he knows of a hotel that we can go to. We end up in some unknown hotel, which at this point my parents can't even remember the name of. And so at that point we stayed 2 days in Mexico City, trying to, basically waiting for the call to head over to Mexicali, which is where we had to basically stay there. We took a bus drive out there for, I think it was 2 days, 2 or 3 days. When we arrived in Mexicali, we arrived at a house that was owned by a family that we didn't know. It was an unknown family that took us in. We spent there roughly about 2 weeks or so, waiting for the call to cross the border. 2 weeks later, we received the call, basically telling us that we were going to cross the border, going from Mexicali into Calexico. The crossing was not going to be legal, it was illegal, right? And so at 1 a.m. We basically are told that it's time to head out, cross the border, and my parents are sent out into this dark field, just in the middle of the night, told just to walk straight, right? And you could imagine in the field, it's night, right? It's dark. They've never been there, and they're trying to walk straight, whatever straight is. And so they walk for about 2 hours. They're carrying us, so that we can keep up. And along the way, and this was a barren place too, so there weren't a lot of trees, or flowers or any of that. It was just kind of a desert type of terrain. So along the way, a helicopter was coming around, the border patrol. At that moment, we lucked out because there was actually a bush. It wasn't even a tree that we were able to duck under until the helicopter passed us up. And from that point, it was another hour or so that they had to walk until they got to the border fence, which had a cutout on there. Went through it into Calexico. From Calexico, they walked another 3 blocks or so straight, right? I mean, so about 3 blocks or so, and at that point, that's when the person that was helping us out was waiting for us in the truck. From that point, we drove off into LA, spent 2 days in Los Angeles, again with another family that we did not know, but that was all part of this plan. After LA, we headed over to San Francisco. I've got the picture up there. It's a beautiful city. So once arriving in San Francisco, we basically ended up living with my uncle for a couple of days. And then kind of bounced around between my uncle's and my aunt's house until my dad found a job, which I think was just a couple of days after he had arrived. So at that point, had enough money to rent a place, rented out a garage, which was infested with fleas and cold, and so my mom found some pots there, and they made dinner and started our continued our family here in the U.S. Right. So from there on, we ended up living with my uncles and my grandma, just kind of progressing and every year trying to get better and become a better family, more prosperous family. So and again, the picture there is in the Mission District. I was about 2 or 3 years old on there. So. All right, so from there we move on to the hobbies. So I tend to have a lot of hobbies. I have family, so a lot of my time is taken up by doing external things. So one of my first hobbies that I really enjoy is jiu-jitsu. Practice jiu-jitsu, been practicing it for about 2 or 3 years or so. Along with that, my son also practices jiu-jitsu, and so I help in teaching his class. And I get a break in the feet. Along with that, I also like to meditate at least once a day. I started meditating some 15 years ago or so. It was basically when my dad's friend gave me a book, and from there, I started reading and just started meditating. It's really helpful. It relieves me from stress and from just the everyday things and work that I need to accomplish. So, and I also like weightlifting, so try and do it 4 or 5 times a week. Again, it's another stress relief that helps out quite a bit. And the other thing is eating. I like to eat. I mean, it probably doesn't seem like it, it's all the exercise, right? But I like to eat, I like to cook. I cook all types of food, Central American, Middle Eastern. By no means am I an expert on all of them, but I try my best. I love to go out into the city and taste all types of different types of food. I think it's a good way for me to experience the other cultures. And last but not least, music and dancing. All types of music. There's not a specific one that I always listen to, but I do like Latin music, classical music, jazz, pretty much anything. In fact, my daughter plays the viola and my son plays the violin, and so I've started taking some classes from them, and I'll be, hopefully within a few months I'll be playing the viola and the violin or so. And of course, as I mentioned, dancing. I like to dance. I don't think I do this often enough, but definitely love to do it whenever I get a chance. All right, my education. So I've got 3 schools here. I've got Aragon, which is my high school, Kenyatta College, and San Jose State. Reason I've got Aragon High School on there is because even though as a child and at a younger age I wanted to work for NASA and be a pilot, that was the one thing I wanted to be. For some reason, somewhere in the middle of middle school, freshman year or so, I had kind of lost that desire to become, to work for NASA. Not sure if I had fully lost it, but it was kind of not in my mind anymore. And so during high school, in my math class, we had an engineer from Ford show up, and he basically talked to us about what it was like to be an engineer, and the whole process of building a car and things of that sort. It was an hour talk, kind of like the talk that I'm giving right now, and it was something that just kind of changed my life, because it was at that point that I basically decided that I was going to be an engineer. So definitely, when Rance asked me to give this talk, I was definitely going to do it because of my experience that I had. So, so that was high school, Aragon in San Mateo. So from there, I knew that in order to become an engineer, I needed to focus fully 110% on school. At that point, and I'm not saying that this is something that you should do, I basically got away from my friends, and I decided I was not going to have any friends, no girlfriends, and parties at a very minimal kind of a thing. It worked great because I was able to focus in school, but at the same time, it created a lot of stress, trying to stay away from people. Also, I'm sure that people found me to be a little weird. So, but what I'm trying to say here is that it was just the immense focus that I needed to get through this. And so did it about 2.5 years at Kenyatta, did a lot of my undergraduate work, did some engineering classes, some math classes with Dr. Enriquez. I'm sure some of you might know him. And really awesome guy.
Retired. He retired.
He retired?
Very recently.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
He didn't tell me that. This whole time I thought he was still working. Oh wow. That's why he's traveling so much, maybe. So, well, that's too bad. Well, it's good for him, but it's bad for the students, I guess. Yeah. And so, again, I did about 3 years here with him, and he's been one of the most awesome teachers I've had in college. So, very helpful, very knowledgeable, not only technically, but also, as a person and being able to help you out through, the difficult parts in engineering and math. And so, that's Kenyatta. From there, I moved on to San Jose State. At San Jose State, I did another, I think it was about 2 or 3 years. And during this whole time, I was working and going to school at the same time. In some cases, especially when I got to San Jose State, I was kind of working almost close to 80 hours, almost like a full-time employee. And so it got a little hard. Nonetheless, I continued on it until I got an internship at NASA. And so during that time, NASA ended up paying for my school for the most part. The only thing I think I had to purchase were books, which is actually probably the most expensive part, right? But let me get a little bit of water here. And so they ended up paying for part of my school, and then the other part was out of working and also having my parents help me out with the fees as well. So that was extremely helpful, and so couldn't have done it without them. The whole time we had one car too, so we were trying to save because we had, at that time my sister was in college too, so we had 2 people in college. So I used to drive down to San Francisco roughly 5:30, 6 in the morning, drop off my dad, come back to Kenyatta, or in this case over to San Jose, and then in the evening pick him up. So I was doing about 100 miles per day, I think. The car still exists. It's got about 465,000 miles, but it's still alive. Just recently I told my dad to get rid of it, and he looked at me, was pretty upset. He turned on the engine, it's extremely smooth. I was like, Dad, keep it. Yeah. It's a Honda Accord. Yeah, they keep going forever. So that's not an advertisement for Honda. So again, that whole time it was pretty stressful. Nonetheless, I enjoyed my time in college, and the project that I had, the senior project for my graduation at San Jose State was a hovercraft. I made it kind of in the size of a Honda Accord, right? And it was built out of foam and carbon fiber, and was capable of lifting roughly about 1,000 pounds. So it was really cool. Nobody wanted to try it out, so I like to take risks, so I jumped in. And the reason they didn't want to try it out was because you got big fans, and this has just been designed by students. So, so I got on it, went down the street, and this was like 2 in the morning. just accelerated. It was one of the coolest things I've ever done. I did it twice and then had to bring it back in because the fan was pushing into the motor, and if that happened, it was basically going to break apart and hurt somebody. So, but that was the senior project. Enjoyed it quite a bit. And as I say, at that point, I was already working for NASA as an intern, so I was getting a lot of cool experiences. And then one last thing also, when you guys get to this point, when you're doing your senior project, don't try and fund this on your own. Initially, we tried doing that, but it was going to be pretty costly, and it turns out that Johnson & Johnson gave us roughly about close to $10,000. So, and all we did was ask. So always keep that in mind. So again, during my internship, I did a lot of the internship at NASA Ames with one group, and that was the thermophysics group, which is who manages this facility here. Some facts about NASA Ames is it's been there since 1939. At that point, it was actually called NACA. It wasn't NASA yet. Currently, our director is Eugene Tu, and we have quite a few expertise. We have entry systems expertise, which is basically expertise in having vehicles come back into the Earth or into other planets. Supercomputing, Silicon Valley, we have to be the champions on that. Air transportation, airplanes, so whenever you get an airplane, that's us making sure that you guys are safe up in the air and efficient. Astrobiology and life sciences. Space and Earth science. So one of the missions of NASA is to protect the Earth, and that means protecting it from basically anything that could potentially destroy it or ruin it, both internal and external. So even if, global warming, right? That's one of the things. Currently, NASA Ames runs on a budget of about $160 million, which is not too much, but we're clever about working with other companies to get the maximum return on there. We have about 2,300 people working there, and that kind of varies, especially in the summertime. We have interns coming in, and that's kind of like a big wave that comes in. There's a lot of interns, a lot of internships, possibilities in different departments there, so something to keep in mind. So going back to this facility here, it's called the Aeolian Facility, the Mars Aeolian Facility. This tower here is about 100 feet tall. It houses this wind tunnel. When I was there, they had just the wind tunnel itself right there, but now they've added the vortex generator and the Titan wind tunnel. So this one's a closed circuit, which means that nothing gets in or out. This wind tunnel here is an open circuit, which is basically air comes in through here and out through the back. The vortex generator is basically what the name says. It's a vortex generator. And the main purpose of this one is to study dust devils on Mars. We also do that study here in this wind tunnel as well, but it works a whole lot better on there. And so this wind tunnel here and the chamber, so the chamber gets pumped down it can be pumped down into different pressures, but mostly it's as low as 0.07 psi or 5.5 millibars on there. And again, as mentioned, it's an open circuit tunnel with 13 feet. It's 13 feet long and operates with a fan during terrestrial testing, which means that when this door is open and we don't pump it down, then we can use the fan that's over at the end. And I think I have a better picture here. Yeah. So over at the end, you can't see it. Over at the end, there's a fan that basically pulls the air in through the test area there. And but that's only used during terrestrial testing. So if we want to test at Martian conditions, then at that point, the fan would not work, right? Because we've got nothing in there, it's been evacuated. And so what we do is we create a pressure differential by injecting air at this end, and that creates the wind flow. And this picture that you have here is what we basically study mostly within that wind tunnel, which is essentially what's called ventifax. And ventifax is basically just studying how the wind and dust erodes rocks, or how it flows around a rock or a mountain. This might seem trivial, but it's super important when we send vehicles out there to Mars, robots. The robots that are out there use this knowledge to look at the rocks and understand how the air or the wind has eroded the different rocks. So if I had a geologist here, he'd give you a whole 3-hour lecture on what it is, but kind of in a nutshell, that's what we do there. And so a lot of the people that do a lot of the studies there are geologists. The other thing that we do with this wind tunnel is also we use the wind tunnel for basically flight hardware on spacecraft. So because we can pump it down, we can simulate different pressures and put in model robots and things of that sort in there. So on my off time, I used to play with this wind tunnel and just make little airplanes. That was a really fun thing to do. Be real careful not to let the airplane fly into the fan though, because it is at the end. It's got a little fence, but nonetheless, I would have been fired. So again, so that's the Aeolian Facility, and that's managed by the Thermal Physics Facilities branch. So on here we've got the picture of this shuttle. It's now retired, but the reason I have it up here is because on the bottom of the shuttle it has tiles. These tiles protect the vehicle, and actually it has some at the top as well, but the most critical ones are here on the bottom and on the wing tips. And these tiles protect the shuttle from melting, burning up and melting away on re-entry. Unfortunately, they are very delicate, and we did have one of the shuttles kind of, basically break up on re-entry. So we saw how delicate these tiles are, and the public was able to see how critical the tiles are in protecting against the heat. So, really, space is really not made for us, and so. Everything that happens in space, or every time you go out there, it wants to completely annihilate you and kill you. So that's the way you can look at it. So again, these tiles are tested here at Ames, and we test them in the ArcJet facility, which is part of the Thermal Physics Facility. And on there we have, over on the left here, we have what is an ArcJet. It's got a bunch of hoses. I couldn't tell you how many there are, but it's an immense amount of hoses on there. They carry gases, they carry water. A lot of the testing that goes on is, it's extremely hot plasma, and so you need to keep the ArcJet itself cooled so that you won't melt it. And in fact, while I was working there, we had a lot of work on return to flight. Return to flight was after the shuttle broke apart over Texas. We were in a stand-down position for about 2 years. During that time, we had to test a lot of materials and figure out what had happened. The interesting thing is that during this time, I was building my hovercraft. And one of the things that we had done with the hovercraft was tested a lot of foams. On that shuttle, what ended up happening was a foam hit a tile. A lot of people think, foam is a very soft, something that won't hurt you, right? But it turns out that there's different types of foams. And it was a foam that hit the wing and damaged the tile, and which allowed the heat to come into the wing and from there we know that it broke apart, right? At the same time, I was working here, and I knew that what thermocouple data looks like when it's damaged, when it's overheated, right? And so it was an interesting time for me in terms of that. As soon as I saw the video, I could tell already what had happened. Of course we had, it was something that had to be tested and had to be confirmed with data. We can't just have somebody say, hey, I know what happened, this is what happened, right? So, but it was interesting in that two of the components that created this besides other issues, two of the components that created this tragedy, I was actually working with. So, goes to show that internships are extremely helpful in getting your career going. And so going back to the ArcJet here, this is what it looks like when we're testing a sample. This right here is what's called a reinforced carbon-carbon. That's the black piece that you saw on the space shuttle, and usually is on the nose tip. That's where the hottest part of the shuttle usually occurs. Over here we have another design, and this is just another vehicle design that we were testing at that time. And then I've got a video for you. Let me see if I can play it here. Do we have Wi-Fi here? Yeah. Bear with me here. So this video shows the testing that goes on there in the ArcJet facility. Let me see if it has some volume on there. No, well, so that's the testing of a material on there. And what you see there, that purple area, the purple area, that's the plasma. So basically the way the ArcJet works is that,
10 seconds.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, that is the sign. I'll let it go. I'll stop talking. Oh no. Okay, now I can talk, I guess. So the way it works is we've got superheated gas that flows into the material, and that's what creates our testing conditions. Within this chamber, we also pump it down to whatever pressures we need. And pressures affect how the material is heated. The other thing that, if this video played, well, what I can show you here is, if you look at these streaks, these are pieces of the material coming off. You might think that that's something that we don't want, but in reality we do want that to happen, and that's called ablation. And what that does, it basically keeps the inside of the material, if you imagine this being the inside of the shuttle.
3, 2, 1. East funnels out. Yeah, normal shutdown.
Oh, there it is.
Okay, the east funnel is coming in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. East funnel is in.
So again, all these sparks flying off is material coming off called ablation, and that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to do that because it releases energy when that happens, and so it keeps the inside of this material a little bit cooler. Now these samples have thermocouples. We have infrared cameras looking at them as well that provide us with temperatures. And temperatures on those materials can reach up in the thousands of degrees. can reach into the thousands of degrees, 3,000, 4,000 degrees Celsius. So it's pretty hot stuff. And in fact, this ablation is kind of somewhat of an old way of cooling things off. The Russians actually used wood, believe it or not, for their vehicles. And so if you have a thick enough piece of wood, it actually would protect you against the heat coming off. But the price that you pay, though, is that it's super heavy. So that's another thing that gives, that's another thing that is bad for the vehicle, because it also creates more heat if it's coming in heavier. So that's the ArcJet facility. From there, the second group that I ended up working with was the facilities group. As I mentioned earlier, we have construction and demolition going on at NASA, and this is kind of pretty much at every center. We've got 10 NASA centers, but here at Ames, we demolished, no, that's not the one. There we go. We demolish facilities that are no longer in use. Basically, a panel gets together and decides whether we will be using this facility or not, and if it's worth keeping around, because whenever you keep a facility, you have to maintain it, and that's money that you have to spend on it. A lot of this work, or actually all the labor, is performed by contractors. Us NASA people manage these projects, and so make sure that NASA gets what it's paid for. So the other building that we have here is the sustainability building, and this one is one of our newest building. And the neat thing about this is that it's got a lot of computers and a lot of sensors in it, and it's kind of modeled off of the space station, right? Trying to control everything on it and trying to make it efficient, to the point that we're basically, it uses 90% less potable water. The urinals are actually waterless, and I'm sure, well, I'm not sure that everybody's seen that, but nonetheless, they don't use water. This building also has geothermal wells for heating and cooling. The other thing is that it recycles all its gray water. So, do any of you know what gray water is, or no? Okay. So gray water basically is water such as your sink water, right? When you wash the dishes, that's considered gray water. And when you wash your clothes, that's also considered gray water. That's useful water that if you're able to recycle it, you can use it and reuse it again, over and over again. The other option that they had, which they decided not to implement, is recycle urine, right? Because that's also water. But a debate went on, and they decided not to recycle urine. Most people that were going to be in the building did not really want to think about that. So, but that's one of the things that you could do to make it even more efficient, right? So. And the other thing is the way it's positioned and the design of it are set up so that it takes advantage, mostly in the summertime, of the winds that come in over the bay. And so that reduces the cost for air conditioning. And as I mentioned earlier, the computers control pretty much every aspect of it. And so they raise or lower the curtains depending on what they're sensing, what the sensors are sensing. So. And they also made it appealing or pleasing to the eye, so there's plants all along here. But then these plants also have a purpose. They're native to California, and so they don't use up a lot of water. And the way, you can't see it there, but the way it's set up, it's got a little ditch there, a little canal, where it gets filled with water, and again, when the bay wind comes in, it cools things off. So it's a pretty neat little building there that we have. And we're actually in the middle of constructing another building, which is going to be mostly for science purposes. So I'm a little excited to see that building. So the The other group that I've worked with is the Flight Systems Implementation Branch. And within this group, what we do is we work with scientists who want to perform different types of experiments on the space station. And us as engineers, we design the hardware for them to be able to perform those experiments. On here, what we have is what's called the bioculture system. And the bioculture system is a system that is able to sustain different types of cells. On last November, I was out at Kennedy Space Center for roughly about 4 weeks, testing this system and getting it ready for launch. The process of getting it ready takes roughly about a week and a half. So it's pretty intensive, long hours. Plus, you throw in there the variability of the rocket in that, yes, we're launching, no, we're not launching, weather's bad, so there's technical issues with it, and so we're not launching again, well, maybe we are, and the schedule on the rockets is not set as we're launching tomorrow for sure, right? So that makes it a little bit harder with whenever we go out there with these payloads, because, again, we prepare them for launch, and then we got to what's called demanifest them, bring them back, deconstruct them, rebuild them again so that they can be launched. And with this particular system, what we had was bone cells and heart cells. The really neat thing about this is that these heart cells were at one time bone cells, and so they were reprogrammed to become heart cells. I don't have a video of it, but actually I have a video on my phone, but I couldn't show it to you here. But the neat thing about these heart cells is that even at the cellular level, just 2 or 3 cells, they actually beat just like a real heart. So it's a really neat thing to see this video, because you think of a heart cell and you don't imagine that it's going to beat the way it does. So this cassette that you see here over in this area is basically the life support system for those cells. It has what we call the bioreactor, which is the home of those cells, and we have food for it, which is just water and sugar. And this area is where we keep the food and also the waste. And so this bag right here is the media that's been heated up, or the food that's been heated up to a 37 degrees plus or minus 1 degree. And that's also the temperature that these cells need to be maintained at, which becomes a very difficult task when you're up in space, because there's a lot of variability on the vehicle when it's going up and down, and so you need to maintain these temperatures pretty tight. Otherwise, these cells go into stress, and then now you're adding another variable that the scientists do not want when they're doing this testing. So they want to minimize the variables on there. Excuse me, my hand's falling asleep holding this microphone. And so the other thing is, besides keeping that temperature, you also want to keep the electronics cool. And so we've got fans in the back over here, and we've got fans in this unit back there that keep it cool. And this whole unit goes up to the space station, into a rack, and the experiments are performed from here on the ground. And a lot of the experiments happen in the middle of the night. So I end up going to work at 5 in the evening, coming out the next day, because the astronauts are on a different time. Midnight, I get to watch them eat lunch while I sit there and wait for them to have their lunch, hoping that they would hurry, because I want to go to sleep. And so what our task down here is, while this experiment is going on up there, is we have exactly the same system down here, and if anything goes wrong, we as the engineers have to troubleshoot it and essentially fix the system while it's up on station. So there's a lot of money that gets poured into this science, and so it's super important to make sure that these things happen. The pictures that I have on here are of the rocket. This was SpaceX 13. Took off, remember it very well, December 15th. I had been out there for a whole month trying to get home. Had a nice Thanksgiving with myself. And so, I was hoping that we wouldn't run into Christmas. And like as I mentioned earlier, these schedules are very, have a lot of variability. You don't really know when it's going to launch. They set us a date, but that usually doesn't happen. So, rocket took off, and then the first stage, which is the back end right here, came back. Right? So this picture over here is of that first stage coming back. Retro rockets start up, and it lands just like that. These pictures are kind of cool, but it's not as amazing as watching it in person. So if you guys are able to watch a rocket launch over at Kennedy at one time, definitely go look at it. It's amazing to see that first stage just kind of, it just travels through the air, and it looks like it's just going to fall, and then all of a sudden the rockets turn on and it just lands like nothing. So pretty cool thing to watch. All right, and so along with that, along with the technical, we also have at NASA leadership programs. And so the leadership program that I have on here that I went through, it's called the Mid-Level Leader Program. And this program dedicates itself to high potential employees. It's super competitive. Throughout the 10 centers, we have anywhere between 20 to 25 people that go through this program on a yearly basis. And from my center, I was the only one that was picked for this leadership program. And the process for it to get into the program is, you write an essay, you fill out applications, you go through 3 interviews, both at your center and headquarters. And to this day, I'm not sure what they're looking for, and they never tell us. And I wish, that once we graduated, they tell us, hey, this is what we were looking for. This is why we picked you, right? So, but it's been an amazing experience going through it. They're focused on making sure that you grow as an individual, which will help you out in both in your technical world at work as well as your personal life, right? Because if you grow, you're growing, in every direction, right? In terms of your mind and what your understanding is, right? So being able to relate to people, being able to understand. Some of the things they do in this program is they give you an immense amount of stress, huge stress, like, the project's due tomorrow. It's like, wait a minute, you just gave it to me and it's 5 p.m., right? And so we end up going to sleep late, having to present early in the morning, and that creates a big stressor for all of us, and we have to work through that. It's a safe space there, so we're able to act ourselves to a certain point, right? Some people, when they're under stress, they fight, and some others fly away, right? So fight-flight kind of a situation. And we're given projects that are team projects, and team projects that engulf the whole NASA. So we've got 10 centers from different states. Each center, believe it or not, has its own culture. It is amazing how the cultures are different. Certain centers do not get along with other centers. And so we have to work through those things to create, to successfully get these projects completed. And so one of the things that I learned in there is that for you to have growth, you have to be resilient, you have to have integrity and tenacity, grit. And surprisingly, that's kind of what I've experienced as an immigrant, right? If you don't have that grit, you will not make it, right? So it doesn't matter how smart you are, how much money you have. If that piece is missing, it's going to be very hard for you to make it in life, right? Or in whatever career you're working in. You're going to get hit with a lot of obstacles, a lot of difficult people. In my work, I think the technical part is the most easiest part in my life. working with the people, that can be a lot harder. So the other thing in these programs is they teach us, or they show us who we are. We all have a good side and a bad side, right? The bad side is really hard to look at, but they help us in understanding that and showing us that piece so that we know ourselves better. We take, I don't know, something like 10, 12 different types of exams where they're looking at us, and we answer questions like, if you were in a robbery, what would you do, kind of thing. And it's like, oh, why are you asking me this? But it's basically to get down and find out how you react in different situations, right? And so then they give you a booklet and they say, this is who you are, right? And here are the positive things, and you're like, yes, I'm an amazing person. And then they get to the negative part, and it's like, oh my God, like, are you kidding me? That's not me, And so it's a really cool thing to do and to be part of. So there's only a few of us at NASA that actually are able to go through this program, and so recently I heard that they're revamping the whole program, and so they're always trying to make it better. So really neat thing. The other thing they teach us is to give presentations. These presentations can, for some people, it can be pretty stressful, right? And so they teach us breathe deeply, take deep breaths and center yourself, right? Kind of what I do with meditation. So it was kind of a cool thing to know that that's even used in leadership programs. So. All right, and so from there, we get to the Space Bioscience group, which is the group that I work with right now. Right now, I'm working with them as the acting deputy PM for that division. And basically what we do is we manage all those other projects. So the project that I was on is managed by this division. And I say manage in terms of funding, schedule, making sure that our science is completed in a satisfactory way. And some of the studies that we do have to do with fluid shift, vestibular, cardio, immune system. Earlier I mentioned that a lot of strange things happen in space. One of the things that happens is your immune system becomes very weak. So the longer you stay in space, the weaker it becomes. Why that happens, we are not 100% sure, and those are a lot of the studies that we are performing right now. We had an astronaut that went up there for, he was a twin, and he went up there for a whole year to do some of these studies, right? So he was essentially a guinea pig. And so your immune system becomes weaker, and bacteria and viruses and molds, fungus and all that become stronger, right? So you put those two together, and you're in, you could be in deep trouble if you're not careful. And that would be, it's a problem here on the space station, but it would be even worse if you're traveling to Mars or so. So the other thing we also study is DNA damage and repair. How can we repair the DNA, because it does get damaged up in space? Radiation and also the lack of gravity. Believe it or not, gravity is so important for our bodies and for a lot of the mammals and humans, and insects and so on. We use flies. Believe it or not, they're very similar to us genetically. It's like, what? Yeah. But they are, and so we use flies, and we use plants as well. We're trying to grow plants on the space station so that the astronauts can have fresh fruit and plants and things of that sort. So again, gravity affects the plants in a very strange way too. So these are some of the studies that we perform. We've got scientists that come in from different universities, different companies as well. We're working with biotech industry, and so it's a wide array of studies that we perform. The pictures that we see here is, on this picture right here, they are testing bacteria and viruses. And so one of the studies that we did was we basically cleaned tables and toilets up there, or actually the astronauts did, I didn't, but and they found a lot of really nasty bacteria, like stuff that can really kill you, you know, stuff that would normally not grow here that easily, but up there it just grows like crazy. So that was kind of a huge surprise, and originally that was going to be one study. Now we're going on, I think, the fourth study already. So after that those first results, you know, it was imperative to continue in doing that. So and a lot of this research also helps us out here on Earth, right? So it's not just for space, but it's also here for Earth. So again, this is the Space Biosciences group, which is who I'm working with now. And so from there, we come kind of to the end of this presentation, and I've got a quote up there. It says, "Opportunity does not come gift wrapped. You must take risks." Right. So I believe that you must take those risks in order to better yourself and have new experiences. I look at myself as this guy here, right? So right now I'm working for NASA. I don't know where I'll be, in a couple of years from now. But what I do know is that I want to be challenged in whatever I'm doing, and have those new experiences and learn, right? So it's kind of like that city right there, right? There's all these opportunities. You look at them, and I want to be amazed like these guys of the future. So that's all, folks. One last thing. I want to thank my family for helping me out with this presentation. My parents gave me a lot of information, how we got here and so on. My wife and kids, especially my kids, they were listening to me present this to them at 10:30 at night yesterday, and they're 11 and 12, but they gave me pointers like, don't say air, say space. Okay, I got it. So if you guys want to contact me, for whatever reason, there's my email, that's my LinkedIn, and again, thank you for coming out.
Hold on 1 second. We got one quick announcement from ASCC, and then I have just a few.
Hello everyone, my name is Joshua. I am the Student Life and Leadership Assistant at the Center for Student Life and Leadership Development. I wanted to share an opportunity for a leadership program on Wednesday at noon here in this building, 12 to 1, and if you have your spring student body card, you could get free lunch. It is, we'll be talking about keys to time management, and there will be other opportunities about mindfulness and finding your vision as well. Thank you.
So, sign out at either desk or either table. Also, please fill out the survey, and remember we do have university trips coming up at the beginning of next month. Also, there's extra food. Please take all that food. Get as much as your tummy can take. Even take plates.
What are you doing now? You didn't finish it? You stupid. I was honestly in the library. I hate you. What time are you in? I'm gonna get 3:30. Oh, how did you think of San Jose?
Oh, it was good. It was good, yeah.
Did you take pictures?
Well, no, I didn't take any pictures. All it was the consultation. We just got the appointment and...
Oh, they didn't do a stencil?
No, that happens the day of.
Oh, that's weird. You could probably pay for a stencil. I heard they do charge for that. I'm just like...
The survey is now open. Please complete the survey.